Thank you, colleagues. We reconvene the Senate Committee on Justice Policy considering Bill 132. We'll move to our next presenters. Before I do that, I would just like to acknowledge on behalf of the committee the presence of the Honorable Rosario Marchese, former MPP sitting in the 35th, 36th, 37th, 38th, 39th, and 40th Parliament from 1990 to 2014. Welcome, Mr. Marchese. Our first presenters are Mr. Campbell and Ms. Marshall of the Independent Electricity System Operator. You've seen the drill. 5 minutes opening address. Please begin now.
Thank you. I'd first like to thank the Chair and the committee for the opportunity to speak to the IESO's role as it relates to the Ontario Fair Hydro Plan. With me is Kimberly Marshall. Kim is Chief Financial Officer and Vice President of Corporate Services at the IESO. In my opening remarks, I'm going to begin just by a brief outline of the mandate of the IESO, and in particular the role we already play in settling electricity market transactions and in managing the financial variances that invariably arise between forecasts and actual revenues over time. I'll also address the similar role anticipated for the IESO under Bill 132. The IESO has a broad mandate that includes planning to meet Ontario's electricity needs in the near and long term, reliable operation of the provincial power grid, administering Ontario's wholesale electricity market, fostering a culture of conservation, and in doing all of this, of course, engaging with stakeholders and communities across the province. Our role in administering the electricity market is particularly relevant to this discussion. This includes our settlement function that involves managing the flow of funds as between market participants and to fund, for example, the suite of conservation programs delivered by local distribution companies. On the one hand, we invoice and collect payments for the electricity delivered and consumed through the LDCs and by large consumers. Using those funds, we then pay suppliers, including generators who provide generating capacity and produce energy, the transmitters who deliver that energy, and we fund various programs, as I said, including conservation programs. As a not-for-profit entity, our role is to efficiently manage and facilitate these market transactions. Sounds simple, but to give you an idea of the scope of our settlement processes, in 2016 we settled about $17 billion worth of financial transactions. Some of the costs of our electricity system are collected through a mechanism known as the Global Adjustment, and the Global Adjustment covers some of the costs of electricity infrastructure as well as delivering conservation programs. These fixed costs are recovered from all electricity consumers. As you'll know, the government's Ontario Fair Hydro Plan is proposing to spread a portion of these costs over a longer time frame. As the provincial organization responsible for settling electricity market transactions, including the recovery of the Global Adjustment, the IESO has a role to play in implementing that plan. And as described in Bill 132, our role would be very similar to our current role. We would continue to collect money from market participants, such as large consumers and local distribution companies, and ensure that other market participants, such as generators, are being paid what they're owed. However, under the Fair Hydro Plan, local distribution companies will collect less from eligible consumers. I think it's overall 25% less, which will reduce the remittances to the IESO. Obviously, this leaves a shortfall for the Global Adjustment payments, the amounts the IESO has to pay to cover what we owe to the generators and others. This difference will be identified, temporarily held in IESO variance account, and then purchased by the financing entity to be created by OPG. Holding variance accounts is not new for us, and it's something we already do. For example, the Ontario Energy Board sets rates based on supply and demand projections. The variance between the projections and the amount collected from consumers is held by the IESO. In March 2017, for example, the variance was actually a debt of about $81 million. Well, if we look back to May 2015, at that time we had a surplus of almost $200 million. Those variances are reported to the OEB and taken into account by the OEB when it next establishes consumer rates. Under Bill 132, the purchase of the Fair Hydro Plan variance by the financing entity will enable the IESO to make whole all market participants for the amounts they are owed. And I'd note that some of the details are still to be defined in the in the regulations, but this is the process that's being proposed under the bill. And assuming Bill 132 is passed, we'll continue to work with the government to further define and clarify our role in the Fair Hydro Plan. And that concludes my remarks, and happy to take any questions the committee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. To Government Side, Mr. Delaney.
To Mr. Potts.
I'll take that. Bruce, delighted. Thank you for being here and giving the perspective from the IESO perspective on how we're doing this. There's been a lot of talk today about how we could go in and renegotiate, and the Fair Hydro Plan should have gone in and renegotiated all the different contracts that are out there. How would the IESO respond to that as a plan in order to bring immediate cost savings to consumers?
I think as an approach, it's very unlikely to bring immediate cost reductions to consumers. Certainly the immediate part is difficult because what we have seen in all of our contractual negotiations is these do not happen overnight. These, we have a large number of contracts. You would have to run simultaneously discussions with all of those contract holders. And it isn't just a matter of dealing one-on-one with a party on the other side. All of this, the significant contracts would have financing arrangements behind them. Clearly, the contract holder would want to be sure that their financing is brought into line with any new arrangements. There's no, and particularly if you're trying to do a negotiation quickly for, to use your phrase, immediate relief, you're really putting yourself in a position where your negotiating position starts to deteriorate very quickly. The faster you have to do something, then the more difficult it is to pay attention to all the necessary details. And if you're looking at kind of extending the contracts, I think you're also, by doing that, giving up some opportunities. We're in a time of tremendous technological change in this sector. We've seen the growth of renewables, we're seeing storage developing, we're seeing microgrids developing. All of those things hold the promise that as those contracts reach their concluding dates, we can be very much more competitive in how we manage procurements, either through an auction, through competitive processes, so that we can take advantage not simply of the remaining life in the existing assets, but we can take advantage of the new technologies and their reduction in costs. So altogether, I think our view would be better to let these contracts run. It's unlikely that you're going to have any lever that would make the contract holder give up a lot of their revenue. And at the same time, you'd be particularly if you extend the contracts.
Thank you, Mr. Delaney. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell, for being here. My question is it fair to say that the government was more interested in getting immediate relief than actually fixing the underlying problems in the system that have driven up the costs like they have?
Well, I think, we certainly saw in the communities that we talked to, we certainly saw the difficulties that people were having with their energy, with their electricity costs. And I think it's clear that the measures that the government is taking will do something about that right away. If you look at the stream of benefits that come out of the investments that we've made, in addition to the low carbon, et cetera, there's a lot of benefits that stretch out over time. So I think when we look at this, if we take the point that if you accept the premise that I was just speaking to, that renegotiating contracts isn't going to, there's no magic panacea there.
It's going to take time.
It's going to take time. And I think what we are focusing on is putting in place market changes, doing a market renewal program that we've initiated at the IESO to be sure that as time goes on, opportunities for incremental investments come up, that happens in a very competitive way. It only happens when it's needed. And we think that over the longer term, that is clearly the preferable way to put downward pressure on costs.
What's the largest per year dollar amount that the IESO has forecasted for the variance account that's being created as a result of Bill 132? Do you have a number?
You know, I don't know. We actually didn't do the forecast. That was done by the government people involved. And off the top of my head, I'm not sure, actually.
Is there a ballpark that you could give us? You talked about the ebb and flow of the last 2 years when it comes to variance accounts, but I mean, we could be talking about a substantial amount.
I think we expect it'll grow to be a substantial amount. I can't give you a number. I say we didn't do the modeling of this.
Yep. Would it be possible for you to provide the committee with a number in the near future?
I think
when it
what
comes
we
to the
would
modeling?
do is we would inquire of the ministry, and that's about all I can say, is I can make inquiries of the ministry.
So the government hasn't been very transparent when it comes to these things. I mean, we're dealing with leaked confidential cabinet documents as our information for where the government's going with
Well, I think
this
from
fair
our point of
hydro
view, what
plan.
we've been concerned about is making sure that all the authorities and
Thank
so
you,
on
Mr.
are
Smith.
there.
To the NDP, Mr. Tabbins.
Thank you. Mr. Campbell, Ms. Marshall, thank you for being here today. The IESO didn't do the forecast. You didn't do the modeling. Who did?
The Ministry of Energy, I believe, did the modeling. That's my understanding. Just to be absolutely complete, Mr. Tabbins, we had done some of the underlying basic forecasting in the Ontario Planning Outlook, and I believe we updated some of those underlying forecasts of trends, but we didn't then do any of the modeling around the actual plan itself.
So were you part of drafting this plan?
Our people have been involved in commenting on what was needed in the legislation, if that's what you're referring to. Certainly in terms of making sure all the pieces fit together, yes, we've been involved in that.
Okay. And can you say particular areas where you were focused?
I think we were focused on the areas in which our responsibilities would be outlined, and as Bruce said, in particular around the legislation, I think we focused on, do we have the authorities that are needed in terms of doing what we need to do as part of it?
And I noticed the Ontario Electricity Finance Corporation is not actually going to be managing these funds. It's going to be OPG. Do you see any reason why OEFC wouldn't have the ability to manage these funds?
I don't know that we could comment on that. I think that's a better question of the OEFC.
Okay. Have you seen or studied such schemes as have been presented here in other jurisdictions?
I would not, sorry.
I don't know that we've
I wouldn't say
studied them
studied.
exactly. I know that that this kind of transaction has been done in the U.S. I think it's been a little more frequent there. I'm not familiar with any equivalent transaction locally, but I could be wrong about that.
And can you say where in the United States such schemes have been employed in the past?
No, I just know this from conversation. I don't have it. I don't have the specific examples, but I do know that this approach has been taken in other jurisdictions.
And when the Ministry of Energy, which did all the modeling, effectively built this system, came to you, did they ask you about any structural things that could be done to reduce the cost of the system rather than just borrowing money?
I think we're always getting questions about how can we continue to put downward pressure on costs. So that's a regular topic of conversation. And for instance, there's always been the kind of question that is arisen here, which is there something that can be done under the contracts, has been a typical example.
Thank you, Mr. Tabbins, and
Thank you.
thanks to you, Mr. Campbell and Ms. Marshall, for your deputation on behalf of IESO.